This is How About That Podcast, a show dedicated to all things Dallas Cowboys. With both objective and subjective perspectives, How About That Podcast is your place to hear about America's team. Now, here's Joseph Hoyt and Danny Morales.
Cowboys fans, for the first time in a while, I had a new phenomenon today sitting down to record this podcast. I was writing down notes, thinking of storylines, and for the first time, there were actually more notes than can probably fit into a single podcast episode, which is a very, very welcome addition to the monotony of the offseason. In case you guys didn't know, training camp is here. We are 3 practices into training camp by this point. And frankly, we've seen a lot, so I kind of just want to dive right into it. And I want to go straight to, in my opinion, which has been kind of the biggest theme / headline of the Cowboys offseason and frankly, the first 3 days. On Thursday, we talked with Dak Prescott, and we also talked with Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, and Mike McCarthy. And in my opinion, this is a column I wrote on Lone Star Live. You can go check it out for more. But I thought that we had kind of entered the Cold War phase of the Dak Prescott lingering contract extension negotiations. And the reason I say Cold War is because it's kind of like, hey, everyone's saying the right things in terms of the surface level. If you go back in this entire offseason, Dak Prescott has reiterated that he wants to be a Dallas Cowboy. Jerry Jones has reiterated that he wants to keep Dak Prescott as a Dallas Cowboy. Stephen Jones has said the same thing. And yet, if you kind of peel back the layers a little bit, kind of take off the veils, you see that there's almost been some kind of shots from across the bow is what I kind of refer to in my article. A little veiled threats almost to a certain extent. And I think the most obvious one happened on Thursday when we talked with Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott said, he was saying all the right things about, hey, it's a business, I'm here, the contract will figure itself out. Kind of the same thing that he has said for a while. But then he kind of paused at one point when he was asked about how kind of freeing the quarterback market can be right now. In case you didn't know, the Miami Dolphins signed Tua Tagovailoa for, I believe, a $53 million per year deal. Jordan Love, after one season, just became the highest paid quarterback in NFL history. He's getting $55 million per year on his new deal. All that will seemingly indicate that Dak Prescott, it's not a question of will he get more than those guys. It's a question of will he get to the $60 million threshold at this point. But while he was discussing this, asked about how confident that makes him and how free he feels about his future financially, he kind of smirked at one moment. He looked over at a member of the Cowboys PR staff, and then he looked back in the microphone after a big pause, and he says, you know what? I'm going to say it. And that kind of perked everyone's ears up ooh, clearly he's about to take, a shot across the bow in terms of this contract negotiations. Prescott said, quote, I want to be here, but when you look up, all the great quarterbacks I watched played for other teams, which is something, if you kind of look at it, Tom Brady, obviously was in New England, finished in Tampa Bay. Brett Favre played for both the Vikings and the Jets after his career in Green Bay. Speaking of Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers in New York. You kind of look around and a lot of different... Joe Montana ended up playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. People forget about that. You look around, a lot of great quarterbacks don't finish with their teams. And why is that? Disagreements over talent, disagreements over money, disagreements over direction of the franchise. So all those things kind of create ultimately divorces between these great quarterbacks and the teams that they are most known for playing for. And then Dak also said something in that sense that I thought was very calculated. He said, in terms of playing somewhere else potentially or finishing his career elsewhere, he goes, quote, that's not something I fear. It may be a reality for me one day. It may not be my decision. I thought the use of the word fear was very, very important because if you go back to the NFL Combine, when Jerry Jones was talking about Dak Prescott's contract extension, he again said all the right things, said, hey, we want Dak to be a Cowboy for life. And then he was asked, actually, do you fear or are you afraid of a future that doesn't include Dak Prescott? And Jerry Jones says, no, I don't fear that. So it almost felt like Dak, between pausing, between smirking, between feeling himself, as he later said. That's what he titled the dance that went viral when he was at Tyron Smith's wedding in Mexico. The feeling himself dance when he's kind of rolling the dice, rubbing the head. He's obviously very confident about where things are going. And he obviously feels really, really good about his future, whether it's with the Cowboys or not. Because at the end of the day, Dak Prescott's going to get paid a lot of money. And I think he's kind of reminding Cowboys front office and their brass, I have the leverage here, okay? The Cowboys worked out, I think it's Reed Sinnett today, and I joked that like, oh, the Cowboys are taking the leverage back. And it is a joke because there's no reality in which Dak Prescott doesn't have extreme leverage over the Dallas Cowboys. He's got a no trade clause. He's got a no tag clause. If he hits free agency, and Joey Aliberti and I have talked about this before, if he hits free agency, it's going to be like sharks to blood and water, right? There's going to be so many teams that want to get a quarterback that can potentially lead them to playoffs into places that they haven't been. If you look at the guys that are getting paid, I think it's the 2020 first round or 2021. Anyways, one of those first round classes recently. I think it's the Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, Jordan Love class. I think they have 4 quarterbacks now that are making at least $50 million. And their playoff record is 500, according to, obviously numbers. If you think about that, that means that teams are willing to pay for basically playoff mediocrity or average playoff performance because all they want is a chance to get there. Dak Prescott, whether you think he's the top 5 QB or a top 15 QB, Dak Prescott at least has given the Cowboys a chance to get there. And now he's kind of reminding them, hey, I could leave. And then it's funny because earlier we also talked to Jerry Jones, and he again reiterated the same things, that he wants Dak Prescott here. And he said he was his biggest fan. But then he almost said something which I kind of interpreted as him preparing for the worst and hoping for the best to a certain extent. Jerry Jones said, quote, "I do not think that this will be his last year with the Cowboys at all." Then he said, "Am I being psychotic relative to my mirror? No, it's pretty clear, I think. I want to say, if it hasn't been clear, of how much we appreciate what Dak Prescott has meant to this team in a positive way. And the players do play better when he's out there. He makes his teammates play at a higher level. There's no question about it. I'm right there in line with his best fans, but believe it or not, in my life, I've had a lot of things I've wanted that I couldn't get because I couldn't afford it. Now I've learned to live with that in 80-something years. You bet I have. And life does go on. And sometimes when you get a bump like that, you turn around and do better than you would have had you got what you wanted. You would have never known it had you not had to go get there." Again, I think that the Prescott and Jerry Jones kind of back and forth, while it appears, on the surface, hey, both of them want the same things, I think they're also kind of letting each other know, like, hey, if this doesn't work out, Jerry said, hey, if it doesn't work out, it might work out for the best ultimately. We might go in a different direction, and that's something that can get us over the hump. Dak Prescott saying, hey, either you pay me or I'm going to get paid elsewhere. I can enter free agency on my own volition. I don't need you to get paid. That could be something, as he said, that's out of my control. Speaking of getting paid, I did a projection on Lone Star Live of the 3 guys that the Cowboys still need to sign and what they could eventually get. It's funny because the headline I chose for this was like stretching dollars, because Jerry Jones said at one point, hey, I'm really, really good at math, and I'm able to stretch $1 and maximize it with energy, juice, and then he said BS. And he didn't say BS, he said the actual word, which was a hell of a quote. So the Cowboys currently are not really keen on stretching. They haven't shown it. CeeDee Lamb is obviously holding out. He's a guy that it feels like they could be close. Stephen Jones told multiple reporters on Saturday, which is when we're recording, that they have sent offers to both CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott within the last week. Obviously, those have not been agreed to, but they're at least sending offers to kind of try and get a feel for how far they are from CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott's camp. So between CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, and Micah Parsons, there's going to be a lot of stretching that has to do in terms of the Cowboys' finances. I took a look at the projections, and for Dak Prescott, I think you have to start at a baseline of what Jordan Love just got. 4 years, $222 million. That's $55 million per. I think that Dak Prescott could have a chance to get $60 million, and that's where I project him to get. The question, I think, with Dak Prescott is, do you have to maybe give up some years on that deal, or maybe give up some guaranteed money to secure the fact that you could be the first $60 million quarterback in the NFL per year? I don't think he has to, because, again, I think he has so much leverage. 4 years, $240 million. I could see that happening, because if he doesn't get that from Dallas, I think he gets more than that in free agency. So Dallas would probably be, it's funny though. We talk about falling leaves with the Cowboys in terms of, hey, we got to see things play out. 4 years, $240 million. That's a lot more than what the Cowboys probably would have had to pay him if they would have paid him earlier, which is kind of a resounding theme and something that Jerry Jones actually was he wasn't very happy that that's been kind of a storyline. The other day, and I think this is something we need to kind of remind ourselves about Jerry Jones. During that Thursday press conference, when talking about these three guys, he said that, hey, they might make up 70 to 80% of our entire salary cap if we sign them next year, which you do the math, that doesn't really check out. He said, hey, I was also talking about you add in dead money from, last year. They got $20 million in dead contract on this 2024 roster. Dak Prescott, if he's not even on the roster next season, they still have a $40 million cap hit with him because of void years and deferred money. That's kind of that credit card payment that he talks about. Jerry also said something interesting, and I'm kind of going on a brief tangent here, on Saturday that was pretty interesting. It was pretty wild. Not because of how crazy the wording of it was, but just you start to think of this and it's like, could that actually be a thing? Jerry Jones was talking about the future revenue for the NFL. And the reason why these contracts keep going up is because, and the salary cap keeps going up because revenue keeps going up. Well, he recently had to testify at the NFL Sunday Ticket lawsuit in Southern California. The one where a jury ruled that the NFL was it was an antitrust violation for how they distribute their content and kind of withholding it from other people, paying customers on Sundays. That's what a jury ruled. A judge ordered them to pay the NFL to pay $4.7 billion. And it could end up costing NFL teams $450 million in damages. The NFL is appealing this, right? But that's a significant amount of money. And Jerry was kind of hinting at, hey, this could have salary cap ramifications in the future. And the reason we were talking about this was because of the current state of those three negotiations with Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons, and CeeDee Lamb. And it was interesting for him to say that, and kind of wild for him to say that in the context of, hey, we haven't paid these guys yet. Maybe they might be too expensive ultimately to pay because of salary cap ramifications. Kind of want to revisit that. That's not what the salary cap ramifications could be a thing moving forward, though. So that was interesting. So for Dak Prescott, I project 4 years, $240 million. I don't think that that's crazy. CeeDee Lamb, I think, is also pretty easy to tell where he'll end up kind of landing. And I thought a quote from Brandon Cooks was pretty interesting about this. Brandon Cooks has played a long time. He knows a lot of, he's a veteran in this league. Brandon Cooks said about CeeDee Lamb, he's the best receiver in this league for a reason. I played with a guy in Aaron Donald who, if I'm not mistaken, he didn't come to camp 3 years in a row and won Defensive Player of the Year. Brandon Cooks was basically saying that Lamb doesn't need to be in training camp. And also, as we've talked about, and you can go listen to previous podcasts, or you can go online and check LoneStarLive.com for a further breakdown. But because CeeDee Lamb is still on his rookie contract, according to the collective bargaining agreement, the Cowboys can waive all fines, unlike they did that accrued during training camp and minicamp. Unlike Zach Martin last year, who had to pay over $1 million in fines, but I think that was worked into the deal, and that was mandatory according to the CBA. Cowboys and Zach Martin couldn't get out of that. With CeeDee Lamb, they could waive any fee that is accrued by missing training camp practices, which he's already missed 3. So CeeDee Lamb doesn't have to be there. His teammates are saying from like a competition perspective and from an ability standpoint, nah, dude, you go stay in Houston and keep working. We'll hold it down until you get back, is what Jalen Tolbert told me. And when you get back and you get paid, then everything will be good to go for you, and we'll just kind of go from there. So with CeeDee Lamb, my projection I have is 4 years, $135 million, which is just below the $34 million mark. If they want to get $34 million per year, they go to 136. But I think that when you have Justin Jefferson, who is a fellow draft class mate of CeeDee Lamb's, when you have him making 100 and I think it's 40 million, he's making $35 million per year on his new deal. That's the standard. CeeDee Lamb won't get there because Justin Jefferson has a larger history and of doing it. But CeeDee Lamb's going to get close. And I think that 4 years, 135 would probably work for both parties if, again, the Cowboys are willing to stretch. Micah Parsons is in a different boat, though. He's a guy that we really don't have. He's eligible for an extension, And a lot of teams will kind of go ahead and take the initiative and get these guys done a little bit early, especially guys who have proven themselves like Micah Parsons has. Reminder, only him and Reggie White have had more than 12 sacks in their first 3 seasons in each of them. It's pretty good territory to be in. He's been a Defensive Player of the Year finalist all 3 seasons. This year, he's kind of playing off-ball linebacker. That's one takeaway from Mike Zimmer scheme so far in the first few days, is that Micah could be on the move a lot. He could be playing off-ball linebacker, which we'll see if that's where he stays or he goes back to the edge rusher or he goes to the A-gap. He's a guy that could be on the move a lot. Anyways, he's the most dangerous weapon on the Dallas Cowboys defense consistently. He's a guy that's proven. The Cowboys, though, don't have to sign him yet. He had an interesting quote, though, when talking about like his contract situation. And he has already kind of taken the stance of, hey, I'm just going to do what I can, try to chase my goals. And if that works out, everything else will take care of itself. But he said, quote, when you talk about career and legacy, I don't think there's a better career you can have than when you're playing for the star on the side of your helmet. And you have a chance to be the best with the star and you retire a Cowboy. You look at Jason Witten, you look at Michael Irvin, you look at Emmitt Smith. Even though Emmitt Smith also finished his career in Arizona and Jason Witten took 1 year in Oakland, but for the majority of their careers, they were Cowboys. You see they're still in the community. They're still active. The star holds so much weight in that legacy that it brings. There's nothing like wearing the star when you do it right, when you do it the right way. So in terms of being here, I want to be here my whole life. I plan on building a house here and being in Dallas forever. I love the city. I love the community. I love for what it stands for. To be honest with you, I always told you guys the contract stuff will always take care of itself. Winning games is what I need to take care of. I focus on winning games and making plays and getting sacks. Jerry Jones can meet up with the agent later and they handle all that other stuff. I don't know how that goes. I'm just trying to maximize my 2 years left here as much as possible. So Parsons is a guy that is already kind of saying like, hey, I want to be here. I'll let everything take care of itself. But I think one thing that comes with that is the expectation that the Cowboys are going to meet him there. You know, that they're going to be willing to stretch to give him that much money, especially after this season where potentially they could also be paying Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. I think Parsons becomes the first $200 million pass rusher. I have him at 5 years, $200 million. And the basis for that is the deal that Nick Bosa signed before the start of last season. He's getting $35 million per year on a 5-year deal. So if you kind of look at it, that's $200 million to Parsons in total, $135 million to Lamb, and then another $240 to Dak Prescott over the course of the next 4 to 5 years. That's a lot of money. That's literally over $500 million. So the Cowboys are going to have to get creative. All right. Now let's kind of move on from the business side of things a little bit. And let's talk. Actually, before I do that, again, one thing I want to say is thank you to all the new followers on Twitter that have been really checking out our stuff. We're in Oxnard for a while. Yeah, I'm out there every day. I've been getting sunburn, which is something that doesn't really happen. I'm a quarter Mexican, and I've kind of relied on that, and I probably shouldn't rely on that as much. But I've had to, thanks to Saad, Yusuf, and Nick Harris, who've been there with sunscreen ready to go, because I was definitely getting a little red the first few days. But we're out here, we're working, we're producing content, and it's an investment, and it can only really kind of be worth it if you guys like the content. So subscribe, share, all that stuff. Send it. Tell your friends about How About That podcast. Check them out. Check out Lone Star Live. I've got a feature on Trayvon Diggs right now up there, who Jordan Lewis called a savant, and Micah Parsons kind of indicated that, hey, coming off this torn ACL, this dude is motivated. It's funny. Micah Parsons said that in meetings right now, he's going across the entire meeting room and checking that every single person has their notebook and every single person has their water bottle. And it's funny. He said that Trayvon Diggs has the best handwriting and the best notes of anyone in the entire group. Clearly, the dude is motivated after a torn ACL. I found this factoid about Trayvon Diggs. Currently, and actually Deron Bland might be in this category too, currently they're on a better pace in a better projection than Rod Woodson was at this point in his career. And Rod Woodson ended up becoming the modern day NFL interceptions leader. So obviously a lot would have to stay consistent for those two to eventually get to that threshold that would make them Hall of Famers. So a lot to do, but obviously impressive starts for both those guys. He also said, it's funny, Mike also said that I think, hey, you guys definitely pissed off Trayvon Diggs. And when he said you guys, he's talking about the media. And I think he was kind of pointing to the ESPN survey of anonymous executives, coaches, and scouts that didn't have Trayvon Diggs among the top 10 corners. Obviously, coming off an ACL, it's kind of hard to predict, hard to place him a little bit. But I think that that's definitely motivation for him. Being away from the season is motivation for him. Shoot, Deron Bland was also not on the list. He seems like a guy that doesn't really listen to external noise, but maybe there's motivation there. Anyways, I'm very curious to see when Trayvon Diggs, who's currently on the physically unable to perform list, gets back on the field and how good he can look and how quickly that can happen. He's a guy that in 2 games last year had a forced fumble and an interception, was looking great. Clearly, a torn ACL ended that season a little bit abruptly, though. So go check out that feature on Lone Star Live. Let's dive in really quickly to a couple takeaways from camp so far. So we're recording on Saturday, July 27th. So that means 3 practices are in the books, and there's not too much to take away, to be frank, because they're not even in pads yet. It's a lot of install. Literally, the 3rd practice today was after the opening ceremony, and it was pretty much a walkthrough. They call it a mock game. Only 1 guy or 2 guys had their helmets on, and that would be I had 2 guys on the defense. I think Dak actually might have had, the quarterbacks might have had them too, but on defense, only Eric Kendricks and Malik Hooker had helmets on. Why? Because they were getting plays relayed into them, and they had to obviously, they had the helmet headset, so they had to tell the other team or the other players what play was coming. So obviously, not much you can really ascertain from today. But the first 2 days, there are a couple interesting things. I want to start off with Jalen Tolbert, who this is a big season for Jalen Tolbert, former 3rd round pick out of South Alabama. Didn't have a lot of football experience, but a lot of athletic ability. His first year, I think he had 3 targets. I had to look it up because I forgot. He was inactive, a healthy scratch is the first game of the season, his rookie season. Undrafted free agent Dennis Houston got an active roster spot ahead of him. That's a name. It's kind of like a trivia game. I could not remember for the life of me who it was, but that's who got a look over Jalen Tolbert. He only had 3 targets his rookie season. He had to go back to South Alabama to find his confidence. This year, he says his confidence is through the roof. Dak Prescott even said he challenged him and said, "Hey, Jalen, I'm challenging you to be that number 1 guy." And that's what you got to practice like, right? Obviously, CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks are still there, even if CeeDee Lamb's not actually at camp. And they're going to be your 1s and 2s. But Jalen Tolbert's in a race for the number 3 spot with a couple other guys. And even though he's always kind of been the favored guy, Dak Prescott's basically challenged him, dude, practice like you're a number 1 receiver, go out there and take that 3rd spot. Maybe it's because CeeDee Lamb's not out there too, but Jalen Tolbert has looked really smooth. He's looked really confident in his route running. Him and Dak clearly have a good connection. Jalen said his confidence is through the roof, and I think after 2 practices, there's validation for that. He's looked good. I'm curious to see if that can translate, once the pads get on, and if he can consistently do that and really just hold pole position for that race for the number 3 wide receiver spot. A guy who I had high intrigue for that hasn't done that well so far, to be honest, has been Trey Lance. And let's kind of go back to why we thought Trey Lance was so intriguing. Trey Lance is younger than Michael Penix, who was just drafted in the 1st round. Trey Lance is already entering his 4th season. He's a guy that I think has 2,400 less passing attempts than Trevor Lawrence since the 2 of them both entered college at the same time. He's a guy that doesn't have a lot of experience. He's got a lot of potential. He had a COVID season in college that canceled his season. I think they only played 1 kind of mock game just to show off his ability after 1 season as a starter at North Dakota State. In San Francisco, he was the backup to Jimmy Garoppolo, and then when he got the chance to start, he had a season-ending broken ankle that really kind of abruptly ended his time ultimately in San Francisco. Cowboys traded a 4th-round pick for him, had him all last season. He obviously didn't play. So that's just a lot of time for someone not to play. And I think that's one thing watching Trey Lance you kind of notice in the first 2 days. 3, I'm not really counting the 3rd practice. The first 2 days. There was a lot of 7-on-7 and there was a lot of team drills. The first day in 7-on-7, I don't think he attempted something longer than 5 yards, a passing attempt. It was very check down heavy. It almost looked very like, I use the word indecisive because it kind of looked like, oh, I'm freaking out a little bit and then I'm going to check down. And that resulted in an interception one time on a ball that tipped off Deuce Vaughn's hands into Jason Johnson's hands. And it just wasn't, I thought it was a struggle of the first day. The second day, he did look a little bit better, though. He led a 2-minute drill that ultimately resulted in a what they would call a made field goal for the second team offense against the second team defense. And I thought maybe it was just the fact that it was a 2-minute drill, but he looked a little bit more decisive there. They got him on the run a lot where it was like, hey, here's your read, hit that. He had a nice third down completion to Cam Johnson. He had a nice scramble for a couple scrambles actually for a first down. And that was when he's being a little bit more decisive. So even though he wasn't pushing the ball downfield, he said, hey, my first read's not there. I'm going to tuck it and run. And he showed off some ability there. I think moving forward with Trey Lance, what I really want to see is his ability to consistently push the ball past the 10-yard mark, actually push it downfield a little bit, make some confident decisions, make some anticipatory throws, and really kind of show off that arm that made him once the third overall pick in the entire draft. So first 2 days of practice, a little bit not great for the Trey Lance hype train, but a lot of training camp left. And he definitely took a step in practice number 2. I'm curious to see what he does moving forward. On Sunday is the next time we'll see him. Kind of the last takeaway I wanted to address, and then we'll kind of cut it there because, doing solo podcasts is tough and I've been rambling a little bit, but I want to get you guys as much information as possible. And we're coming up on the 30-minute mark. Right now, Cooper Beebe and Tyler Guyton are on the second team offense. Cooper Beebe is behind Brock Hoffman, who's been getting the start at center with the first team through the first couple of days. Chuma Doga has mostly been the left tackle instead of Tyler Guyton with the first team. And Matt Waletzko is also kind of rotated in there a little bit. Some people were freaked out by that. And some people were questioning, hey, why is that the case? I think one thing Mike McCarthy really talked about is, hey, we're still in a ramp-up period with these rookies. They're still learning the offense. They're still learning the speed of the game. And I think the big thing, pads have not even come on yet. Pads go on Tuesday. And that's when you're really going to see that competition ramp up. So for those of you wondering about Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe, questioning why they're not starting yet, unlike some of the other teams that will actually just throw these guys in the fire, the Cowboys are choosing to kind of ramp them up, see how they get acclimated, and then go from there. So I think if it's, the final preseason week and those two aren't starting, then I think you can start to question what happened. Center is a little bit different. Brock Hoffman is very, very respected among his peers. He's a guy that stepped in and played well last season when he had to. He's a guy that that should be a legit battle between Cooper Beebe and Brock Hoffman. Tyler Guyton, though, if he's not starting by the end of the preseason, then you got some concerns. I will say I watched him in 11-on-11 yesterday, Friday, July 26th, and I was pretty impressed with just his movement. They had one toss to the left where just his ability to get out in space and his size and his speed out there, it looked really good. So he's a guy that, obviously they drafted in the first round for a reason, has a ton of potential. I would not freak out because he's not starting yet. Let that thing play out. Let those battles roll. And we'll check in on that after a couple weeks in pads. So, all right. I know that was a rambling of a podcast. Actually, it was the first time I've ever done a solo podcast. So that's probably part of it. But I want to get you guys a lot of information and check in with you. I think the takeaways, the Dak extension, will they or won't they, is definitely something to keep an eye on. I think Jalen Tolbert has been very impressive. Another guy who's been impressive really quickly, a little bit, I noticed it today a little bit. Marshawn Nealon's getting a lot of run in potential packages with the starters. Second round pick out of Western Michigan. That's something I'm going to keep watching a little bit more moving forward, but a note on that. And yeah, CeeDee Lamb, we still wait for him to show up. But I'm showing up every day for right now, getting sunburned in the process. And you can find all our coverage here on How About That Podcast and LoneStarLive.com. Thank you everyone for listening, and I'll see you again next time.
Thanks for listening to How About That Podcast.